You know, that fellow sitting on the throne that I thought was the giant turned out to be the most unlikely looking giant killer there's ever been in my life. Because he took a little old green preacher that knew nothing, and he knew that I knew nothing, and he wrapped those little old arms around me and lifted me up and encouraged me, and he slew that giant of fear in my life. And I thank God for him. And I tell you what, I'm going to get to heaven one of these days, and I'm going to spend a few million years with Jesus. I want to see my mother and father. I want to see family and friends that have gone on. But not long after that, I want to look up Brother Clay Campbell, that little old unlikely looking giant killer in my life. You know, the giant killers they're not always the ones that stand up here and preach the sermons. The giant killers are not the ones that get their name in the bulletin or necessarily sit in the deacon's meetings or teach a Sunday school class. Sometimes giant killers are just unlikely looking young people. Unlikely looking senior citizens that many think have got past the time that they could do anything in their life. I want to tell you there's some giant killers sitting here that can slay the giants of fear and these giants that we mentioned that we all face. Giant killers are confident. Secondly, look at verse 23. And he's talked with them. Behold, there came up the champion, the Philistine of Gath, Goliath by name, out of the armies of the Philistines, and spake according to the same words, and David heard them. He said, I'm going to get you. But there's something different this time. This time the giant killer heard him. Let's look what happened. And all the men of Israel, when they saw the man, fled from him and were sore afraid. All the big, strong, brave warriors run for their life and hide. Leaves one person standing there, little David, the giant killer. And I love this part right here. Look down at the last part of verse 26. That old giant's running his mouth. I'm going to do this and I'm going to do that. Look what David says. Remember, this is a child standing there by himself while the army's hiding back here. And this child says, who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should defy the armies of the living God? Who does he think he is? When I read that scripture, the thought came to my mind, the ACLU, who do they think they are? Every time anything happens in this nation that might tend to just steer us a little bit back toward God, they say, lawsuit, no, we can't have that. Who do they think they are? Who does our education system think they are to tell this beautiful bunch of God's creations right here that they're nothing more than a bunch of monkeys that have developed a little bit more than those out in the jungle there? Let me tell you, you are a creation from God. And you're something special to God. And God loves you with all of His heart. And you're more than a monkey. And don't you listen to anybody that'll tell you anything different. Who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he'll defy the armies of the living God? Who does he think he is? He's confident. How did he do that? How could David stand there so confident when everybody else is back here hiding and shaking? How did he do that? We need to know that, don't we? If we're going to fight the giant, we need to know how he did that. Let's go back to chapter 16 just a minute. All of David's sons, Samuel goes to Jesse and says, God sent me here. I understand one of your sons is going to be the next king. So Jesse thinks, well, surely it's got to be my oldest boy. So he marches him by. And Samuel says, no, that's not him. One by one, those boys marched by. He said, no, none of those. Is this all you got? Well, I got one young kid back here, but he's a kid. Bring him out. Let's see him. Samuel said, that's the man that God has got to be our king. And then look at verse 13 in chapter 16. Then Samuel took the horn of oil and anointed him in the midst of his brethren. Listen to this. And the Spirit of the Lord came upon David from that day forward. See, in the Old Testament, when God needed a great work done, He sent the Spirit of God on a man, and that man would do that work. And then the Spirit of God would leave. Until another work needed to be done, and the Spirit of God would come. But when David, God says, I'm going to show you a picture of what it's going to be like in the New Testament day, in the day of grace, in the day that we live in. The Spirit of God will come and never depart. There's your answer. That's how David was able to stand up against the giant with everybody else fighting there. He's got the same power that we've got. That ought to encourage you. That ought to encourage us to stand up against the enemy. When God says, I'm going to send, Jesus said, I'm going to go away and I'm going to send a comforter that He will abide with you. How long? Forever. There's the answer. I'm going to try to hurry. The giant killer is not always accepted. Go back to chapter 17, verse 28. And Eliab, his eldest brother, when he spake unto the men, and Eliab's anger was kindled against David, and he said, Why camest down hither, and with whom hast thou left those few sheep in the wilderness? His brother heard him shouting at the giant. Who you think you are? And his brother comes out and says, What are you doing here? Don't you have work to do back home? Let us brave men take care of this. Well, they're hiding back here and trembling, the brave men. They said, why aren't you back there with the sheep? You know, we think a lot of times, we expect opposition from the world, don't we? But we don't expect opposition from God's family. I was pastoring a church up in the mountains, and I'd seen something in the American Family Association Journal about something terrible that had happened on TV, that they had shown on TV, and it showed the sponsors there. So I said, I'm going to give our congregation the names of these sponsors and ask them to write a letter, to ask them not to show things like that on television. And if you won't quit showing that, we're going to quit buying you products. So I stood at the back door with the information, and as one of my deacons walked by, handed him that information, tried to. He said, I don't want that trash. I said, yes, sir, that's what we're doing this for. We don't want that trash. He said, I'm talking about the trash you've got. That's a deacon. Now folks, if you won't get in the battle, that's fine. You go hide behind the rocks. But don't jump on those that are fighting the battle. Don't jump on these young people. Some of the strongest Christians that I've run into in my 23 years of pastoring are good, God-fearing young people that fight battles every day that somebody my age can't even imagine in high school. And they fight it, some of them with a smile on their face and joy in their heart and confidence in Jesus Christ that they're going to make it through the day. I mean, they have peer pressure. I'm sure that I can't even imagine. We had some little peer pressure. A little peer pressure at school, but nothing like these kids face. But I want to tell you, that's a giant that God will give you the strength and the power to overcome if you'll trust in Him. Verse 33 is something that we hear so many times. And Saul said to David, Thou art not able to go against this Philistine to fight with him, for thou art what? But a youth, and he a man of war from his youth. So many times I've heard people say, well, they're just kids. They're just kids. Again, some of the strongest giant fighters I've ever run into, just kids. Maybe older people. I had I had a funeral about 6 months ago of a lady that was a member of the largest Baptist church in Hall County. She had been a Sunday school teacher in that church, sung in the choir. Her husband was a deacon in that church. But she was 94 years old. And the largest church in Hall County with all their ministries couldn't have one ministry that could go by and knock on her door about once a month and say, "How you doing?" She hadn't heard from that church in years. So her granddaughter went to my church, so I wound up with the funeral with not anybody from her church. You know what that church was saying? Might not have said it with their words, but they said it with their actions. You're just an old person. Don't need you anymore. What can you do? Let me tell you, young people, let me tell you, senior citizens, when anybody tells you you can't do anything for the Lord, I want to tell you, you tell them about David. They're not always respected, but they're faithful. Look at verse 39. One of the most misunderstood passages by some people that in the Word of God. And David girded his sword upon his armor and essayed to go, for he had not proved it. And David said unto Saul, I cannot go with these. I have not proved them. And David put them off. He took that stuff off. He couldn't use that armor. It's too big for him. Verse 40, and he took his staff in his hand and chose him 5 smooth stones out of the brook and put them in a shepherd's bag. I've even heard preachers stand in the pulpit and say that David didn't have much faith because he got 5 stones. He didn't know if he could kill him with the first or not, so he got 5. His brothers are hiding back here. The armies are hiding back here. He's standing by himself all alone, and somebody's saying he don't have faith. You know what God impressed on me? That He gave David enough common sense to know because you have got one, don't you think you're not going to be attacked by another one? And I believe what God is telling us here, when David picked up those 5 stones, He is saying, I can get that giant, and I can get that one, that one, that one, and that one. And if he had to, he'd pick up another handful of stones. It might have been all that little hand would hold, you know. He was faithful. Then, verse 45, giant killers are commissioned by God. Then said David to the Philistine, Thou comest to me with a sword and with a spear and with a shield, but I come to thee in the name of the Lord of hosts. That's the only way you better go up against the giant, in the name of God. Because let me warn you again, I don't want to glorify Satan in any way today, but I tell you, there's some big giants out there. There's some strong, powerful giants out there in this world that we live in. And then I'll close with this. They're victorious. Verse 48 and 49. And it came to pass when the Philistine arose and came and drew nigh to meet David, that David hastened and ran toward the army. Remember, by himself, he's running toward the army and toward the giant to meet the Philistine. And David put his hand in a bag and took thence a stone and slang it and smote the Philistine in his forehead, that the stone sunk into his forehead, and he fell upon his face to the earth. Some people say that's a lucky shot, wouldn't they? Something that I have begged Christians to do in the 6 churches that God has allowed me to pastor is quit saying the word luck. There is no luck in the life of a child of God. Your path is charted by God, and there's no luck. And I tell you what, if He had shot 100 times, He could have put them everyone in the same hole if He wanted to, if God had wanted to. There is no luck. When I was a child, I made me a flip. You could take a forked stick, 2 pieces of inner tube, a tongue out of a shoe, and you could make a formidable weapon, I want to tell you, that would shoot rocks. And I had made me one. And I was shooting one day, and my sister came out there and said, I want to shoot. And I said, no, you can't shoot. She said, I'll take it away from you. I said, no, you won't. I'll shoot you. And I got me a rock just playing, you know. And she took off running. She must have been as far as from here to the parking lot out there, far enough that I knew I couldn't hit her. And I drew back and let that thing go. And while it was in the air, I knew I might be in trouble. Well, it hit her right in the back of the head. I couldn't have shot another 100 times and done it, but hit her right in the back of the head. No luck in that. It got me exactly what I needed. Didn't hurt my sister. I learned that you better never do that again. No luck in the life of a Christian. It won't be luck, young people, if tomorrow the giant attacks you and if you will stand for God. Stand for God. It won't be luck. You can slay that giant that's in your life. I know this has not been an evangelistic message today, but it's a message that we all need in the day that we live in. But even through this, God can speak to somebody that's lost. And as Brother Steve said, that could be the greatest thing that could happen in this place today while they come with a song. That'd be the greatest thing that could happen today if somebody come and gave their life to Jesus right here. That's a simple thing. You might say, I don't know what to do. Well, see, the world has made it so hard. And they've added all this and that. And there used to be places that said you can't get saved unless there's a bench turned backwards right here. We've all been to those churches, haven't we? Got to have a bench turned backwards. You can't get saved. See, the world, that is foolishness. I want to tell you, if you come today with a broken heart and a contrite spirit, and you bow knowing that you're a sinner and lost and on your way to hell and nothing that you can do about it, and you know that Jesus Christ died for you and rose again and is seated at the right hand of God, and that He shed His blood for you so that you won't have to pay the price, and if you're willing to say, God, be merciful to me, a sinner, I am a sinner, come into my heart and save me, God will save you right here whether there's a bench turned backwards or not. Would you do that today? If you've never asked Jesus to come into your heart, would you do that today? And then maybe there are people here today that are battling giants so huge that I couldn't even imagine that. I thank God that I don't know what drugs is like. I thank God that there were none when we came along. A lot of us didn't have to battle that, but there are now. I want to remind you what a giant that is. Don't play with it. But there may be some today that are battling giants in your life. May have nothing to do with sin in your life. It might be relationships in your life. And you've cried every tear that you know how to cry. And it's not any better yet. And it's a giant that's overcoming you. I want to tell you today, God can give you the strength to stand. Just like what we've heard today. If you're willing to do that. Brother Steve, would you stand? Would you come?
Jesus is tenderly calling me home, calling today, calling today. I from the sunshine of love will fly home, farther and farther away. Calling
someone to pray with you, you can come, I'm sure, and pray by yourself if that's what you want. You want somebody to pray with? I'd love to pray with you today. I know Brother Steve would love to pray. Just give us the opportunity to do that while we sing.
Jesus is calling.